Hey, settle down listeners. It's Vanessa Marshall. We're taking the week off and we'll be back next Tuesday with episode 9. I want to take a minute to thank everybody who's tuning in, listening, sharing, writing us. It's so incredible to see, hear, feel, be on this journey with all of you guys. It's so incredible. We have so much gratitude. So, today we wanted to share a bonus episode, the full version of my conversation with Teresa about the role of fathers and men in our communities. We shared a short clip last week, but it came from a much longer and a very personal conversation between us as women. What came out of it was too beautiful to keep to ourselves. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you next week.
Settle down. Settle down. Settle down.
Settle down.
Settle down. Settle down.
Settle down.
Settle down.
Settle down.
Settle down. Settle right down.
It's just settle down. Well, hello, Teresa. It's nice to be sitting with you. This is my first time getting to talk with you one on one. And I'd love to talk with you about our Indigenous male role models, the father figures that we have in our lives. I'd like to touch on kind of the history of that. Traditionally, what male role models are, sorry, I guess we'll go with father figure, because for this, we want to really focus on fathers. Um, like, what were the traditional roles of a father as you remember them?
When you're raising a child, yes, it's a responsibility of male and female, right? And the different responsibilities that they have. But one of the things that was embedded in us is that everybody plays a role. And there's a certain role that the males uh, play in raising a child. So it wasn't just the father or the mother, it was also a responsibility of the additional family members, meaning the aunts and the uncles, right? Typically, when it came to discipline, they would refer that to the aunts and uncles, right? But traditionally, the father's role has always been to be the provider. And almost everything when it comes to providing, it was also teachings, right? And in many settings, like for an example, one of the settings that they would take the young men to be helpers, we call them muskapiusak, right? So they would be taught at a very young age of their gift, right? So as a provider, as a father, as a teacher, um, they would be given certain responsibilities, and even as far as physical labor. And when I talk about physical labor is that the father would provide the boys to, in my family, my father worked in a sawmill. So the older boys would attend with him to work in a sawmill. And sometimes they would go and uh, in the summer or in the spring, we would go to different farmers and they would do haying. And that's the physical part that they would have to get up bright and early with the sun and do their ceremonial smudging. And then they would go do the labor work. So as they were growing up and having their own families, it took a whole community to, raise a child, right? And that was the case back when I was younger. And over time, that changed because the responsibilities for the men were stripped. They
Yeah.
were stripped when we were put into reserves or into when we signed treaty, right? So they were stripped from all of that. And they were restricted even to leave the community, whether it was for hunting, whether it was for working off reserve, right? So they would have to get permits to get off and do the additional work, whether it was with farmers and stuff. So that came into play. So, of course, they were really frustrated because they were basically stripped from their duties as men. So when that came into play, the women uh, were to play the both roles, right? The
Yeah.
father role and the mother's role. So, but that come into a full cycle where it's actually now the men are starting to come back and reconnect who they are. I see a lot of hope and recovery, if we would call it healing, that's happening with a lot of our men. So, and that's reconnecting themselves spiritually, mentally, and taking that responsibility back, right? So it's
I hear you talk a lot about community. I love that you talk about grandparents, kokums and wisdoms, and your chapans and aunties and uncles, and that to me is kind of the big difference. The big shift that happened is, we no longer had those resources because there was so much trauma, and everybody kind of got separated in what they were responsible for. So, a little bit of what I'd like to talk about is how that spirituality is bringing our men back now, and having that community connection again, because I remember a big piece, when I was little. I talked about my mom being in full addiction when I was little, and it really was my aunts and uncles and my other family members that kind of stepped in to do that. So I do remember some really beautiful male father figures in my life, and the one thing that I remember from them is they were very connected to the culture spiritually. So, can you talk a little bit about how that spirituality is helping men reconnect with themselves?
one of the things that I see that I'm very proud of my own family members, meaning my nephews that are reconnecting again back to the culture or taken an interest in wanting to be the helpers, wanting to be those scapegoats in, say, like a Sundance lodge or even a sweat lodge, how they become connected is always helping and always wanting to learn. So now when we have the big ceremonies, they're there to help and to learn from the elders and what they need to do, whether it's building the big lodge itself, right? So I see that connection spiritually, like in a sense where it's like, okay, I need to do this and I need to reconnect because I have to be a positive role model for my children, my great grandchildren, my children, right?
I love seeing that. Like, it's such a beautiful process to see a man or a woman kind of go through that spiritual realization of who they are. Because I don't think it's a big mystery as to what breaks those cycles and what brings you back. It's just the challenge of finding it, right? So I think when people find what it is they've lost in themselves, it kind of pulls them back into community. And it's supposed to be a beautiful thing. It's not, like, in my eyes, it's not really meant to be this big challenging overcoming thing. It's supposed to be beautiful. And I mean, when you just find that in yourself and your family, and I just think that it's so beautiful because that's who you're meant to be, right? I
Mhm.
think people really, in the world that we live in today, have a hard time just to navigate, work and home life, and what is my responsibility. I just think it was such a beautiful thing when our, ancestral men were able to just be in nature all the time. They're hunting and they're fishing and they're
Mhm.
doing all these things that are connected to nature, and they're wonderful. And now they're having to, navigate urban centers in the city and, find a job, and that's kind of unstable and it pulls you away from family more. So I love that, to be able to go to cultural centers or to go to ceremonies and learn and be out in nature. And I think that nature plays. I'm huge on sustainability and the earth, and um my focus is really connecting people to the earth again. Do you see that as being one of the things that is pulling our men back, is really connecting back with nature and the earth?
And it's really interesting that we would speak about that because one of the teachings that I often hear is that we don't own the land owns us. So, one way of connecting with that is I love to talk about my grandson. My grandson uh, came from. Where his father and his mother separated at a young age, right? So he grew up around myself and the aunties and the mother, and he often talks a lot about losing his way of being a male, meaning that, I grew up around such powerful women. So where do I play a role? And what I see him do quite a bit is that he'll go to the mountains, connect with the earth. He'll g- he's got a favorite spot where he lays tobacco down
Mm.
and to reconnect, and he gets a lot of spirituality from there, right? And he talks a lot about that, right? So it's really beautiful to see him. Yes, there's powerful women, but I have to connect myself to who I am and what I'd like to be as a father to talk about what would I like to see my kids in the future. How would I like to see them growing up and how can I provide that, right? So
I love that because I think you're kind of onto something there about, um, you know, because there was a time, or like I hate to generalize it. In my experience, my son's father wasn't in the picture because he was in addiction. But I so then you have all these women around these men, very powerful. Indigenous women are strong,
yeah.
aunties, and they're a very powerful entity in a young man's life. But I truly believe that that's not anything that will, like, deter them from their path, mostly because I think if we had a little bit more of a matriarchal type society, I think our men are inherently more gentle, more caring, and they can see that the way, that I believe through residential school, sorry, I believe through residential schools, that a lot of our people lost the way that they learn how to love. Like they weren't showed love in those schools, so they don't really know how to pass that on to their kids. So I love that you say that, actually, that your grandson got to be around a lot of really strong women because they can find that piece of love that allows them to find themselves easier.
One of the things that, when you talk about love, we as powerful women were gifted with that love, right? To nurture and to do all of that. So I think about the days of my grandfather before he signed treaty or before he entered into agreement to be placed in a certain place. Meaning the landmark of our community, Ochis, right? But behind doing that, he did have some strong women advisors. So one side was my grandmother's, the Big Johns, right?
Okay.
And then the other side was the Yellow Faces. So my grandfather, so there was 4 on each side. So when my grandfather was, going to sign up for this, he would go to both both sets of grandmas to say, "How should I proceed on, my arrangement with trying to sign this treaty?" So his advisors were all the Kukums. And
Yeah.
he was so instrumental in, being able to sign this agreement in the voices behind the Kokums, right? So when I think about that, the other thing that I think about too is now we're at the point where the men are starting to heal, right? And I see a lot of even single fathers, right? Knowing that role of, the matriarch system of loving, but also them being able to deal with a lot of the hurts and pains to be able to say, "I can love too," right? And there's songs and teachings that go with that, right? The prayer songs or nurturing songs or everything that comes with that, right? So it's like I'm really seeing a lot of hope in a lot of our men. I actually adopted a grandson from the States that I'm hoping to see in the next few weeks or so. But him too, he's come a long ways as being a single father, right? And he plays both the mother and father role of loving his children. And
Right? And you're I have noticed that too, that, a lot of the men that are stepping up are really jumping into both roles.
yeah.
Often it's a situation maybe that they were forced into, where, we still have a lot of trauma in our women as well. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's the mother that isn't in the picture for whatever reason. And I know some beautiful men who have like really stepped up, and that's a lot of weight to take. Like, I don't know, I think women are stronger. Inherently, in our bodies and minds, but to see a man take both of those roles on, like, that's a heavy load. When you take, the role of being the caregiver and you have that full responsibility, sometimes I feel like it's a little bit scary for a man because it's not a traditional role for them. Not only are they having to find themselves and not only are they having to be a caregiver, but they're having to take on that whole maternal role as well. So I think it's incredible that, and you were talking about hope. Like, I kind of just want to wrap that all in because there are a lot of shifts. We can talk about like the mental health issues that our men in our culture have, that, what are the resources that they have to reach out to? And I think we're getting better as a society. I mean, you have to look at it kind of as the full picture in the colonial sense as well, because we're living in different times, that we're not just in our own communities, we're having to integrate. And so being able to access the resources that, might come from another culture, but then having your own culture and your ceremony. And that is where our elders come in. Because even in my experience, uh, being able to talk to elders, it really keeps you grounded in that peace, that this is truly what puts me at peace. Like, I can manage my life and I can manage the day to day situations. But when it really comes to that true peace, I find it really comes from the wisdom of our elders. And sometimes it's just like, like, settle down, like,
Mhm.
really, we use that word because look inside of yourself, look back. And I think that's what our men are doing right now, are really sort of allowing a lot of the pieces to kind of fall away and rebuilding that with things that truly matter. And I often see that coming out in spirituality. So I think we touched on it a little bit, but, you know, is there some wisdom or words that you would offer around the spiritual resources that our father figures can work with? Or is there any teachings around? I know it's a little bit strange because we're going from, we're specifically talking about men in our lives, but is there anything that comes to mind that you can think of uh, spiritually that, you would recommend that are.
Well, one of the things in today's society is I think of words like prevention, and I think of words, and they're that there's three terms of the things. One is like, say, for forgiveness, right? So a lot of times I talk a lot about forgiveness, forgiving yourself of, you know, and reconnecting in that way, but also forgiving others. Like I think about co-parenting, and and when you're talking about co-parenting, it's like trying to get your other partner involved in all of this, right? So not talking down on one parent just because you're raising the kids, right? So that's part of healing and part of hope, right? That there would be a sense of belonging and how our men are starting to heal, it could be basic things like even doing a family tree, right? Family tree with the kids, and you can work with that and what their identity is, and you give them that option of spirituality, right? It's not then demonstrating in a sense where, you're not talking down on the churches, you're not talking down on different religions, but we all coexist in a lot of spirituality, right? But identifying yourself of who you are and what your belief is and what your hope to demonstrate to your children, whether it's a mother figure or father figure, right? It's like, and one of the things that I often think about is reconnecting yourself to your namesake, right? And when
Mm.
I talk about namesake, it's the spiritual name that you would have received. And if you don't have one, it's never too late to go get one, right?
We were talking about that, and I think that is such that ownership of having having that name is, like, so incredible. I never went through that. I didn't have any of that in my life. I'd love to do that. But you touched on one thing that I feel like it's like the oldest wisdom is so the simplest also. Something as simple as forgiveness. I don't know why. I mean, it's not unique to the Indigenous culture, but I also feel like we kinda own it because of what has happened in the history of our culture. And to be able to truly forgive yourself for I did a lot of things that just, you know, break my heart to know that I did. But the only way to move forward from that is to truly believe. I mean, first of all, you can't change it.
Mhm.
So you have to move forward somehow.
Right.
And that self-forgiveness is the first part, but then you have to forgive other people. And that to me sounds like the most beautiful wisdom that you could offer to yourself and the people around you, because that is a big part of having people stuck in these cycles, right? I truly believe forgiveness is a big part of that. Um, and I also appreciate that you touched on, like, we were earlier talking about, like, spirituality and what does that look like for people? There's a lot of negativity in some conversations around the church because what the church had to do with residential schools. But my mom in particular used the church to find her spirituality because that's what she connected with. So I agree, like, to stop talking negatively about the church. I mean, you know, my truth and my belief is that the church is an entity. The people that were in the church are a different thing,
Mhm.
right? So people are people, and the church is the church. So I appreciate that you say, like, stop talking negatively about things because that doesn't solve anything.
Mhm.
And we start to get these resentments, right? So I'd like to talk about resentments because I feel like that's a big piece of often what holds men back. And I can't, it's an assumption. I'm not trying to speak for men, but I feel like men are so hurt that it's something that they can't break, a cycle that they can't get out of. And that often will keep people in addiction. It'll keep people from spirituality. And I don't know that anybody has the true answers of how each individual person gets through those resentments, but Um, is there maybe anything that you can offer around holding resentments?
Well, and one of the things that I talk about is that, and you touched on it, is that, and you connected is forgiveness, right?
Mm,
Forgiving yourself, but also forgiving the unforgivable. So,
yeah.
and when I talk about that, yes, historically, our parents and and our grandparents were affected by residential school, for an example, right? I know the history with that, but I also know that, I've done some things that I personally had to forgive myself, but I have to forgive the unforgivable, meaning what happened in residential schools is people that have passed on, and that's only for me to be able to move forward, right? So, uh,
Yeah, that's a
and
big
so
piece, the unforgivable. I think that,
mhm,
that pain that people carry often, again, unique situations. I'm trying to generalize a conversation, but that pain that the unforgivable carries is immense. And yeah, I'm not sure how people get through that, but I think the point of this is that we're trying to offer hope that through some of these reconnections with spirit and culture and knowing and forgiving, those are all I think what our men are doing.
mhm,
I guess is what, right? Like we have a lot of people that are um beginning to heal, and it's beautiful, and I love that it's more apparent that people are bringing their culture back into their lives. I see a lot more, ceremonial things, so like culture camps. I just love to see the young kids learning Cree and, speaking words, and I think that's what it's about is really just growing and building on that.
mhm,
And I mean, you talked about it being a little bit about the kids. And as we heal and age, some of that might still be carried, but I think, you know, we're starting to break a lot of those cycles. And now I see our kids, the young ones, and they're just so vibrant and beautiful.
mhm.
And, when you get to see that spirit, like it's in the spirit. And I we talk about in our podcast, we talk about the spirit being like a fire keeper, or so that fire never actually goes out, but you're sort of responsible to build it. So is there, any other advice that you would give for helping our men build their fires? I don't know, traditionally they're fire keepers, but I just look at that spirit as like a flame, like because it goes higher and lower, and that kind of goes with your energy levels. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but
I'd like to say settle down a little bit at the time.
right?
Uh,
It's
one
so
of the
true, right?
a lot of things come to mind when you're speaking and reminds me of, for an example, I'll tell you, every year we have a land-based teaching in Kootenai Plains. I'd like to invite everybody to come out there because we have uh, different cultures and different elders. Say, like, I got a Blackfoot, I got a Stony, I got Ojibwe, I've got Cree, and like all of these elders, we get together for 4 days where they do a lot of the teachings that we're talking about, right? Whether it's the men's role, the woman's role, and the ceremonial, and they receive names there, right? And it's
Cool.
just reconnecting with the land, right? So that's gonna happen on July 27,
Okay.
this year, and the posters will go out, but that's something that we do every year, and it's not just for a certain amount of people. We've had people come from Manitoba, we had people come from Saskatchewan, and I think there was even a few from, it's getting bigger every year, right? So and
Wonderful.
it's just reconnecting with those teachings and reconnecting with the land, right? Bunch of healing that is happening. And the other thing that I was thinking about too is that we come from small communities and stuff like that. Of course, there's a lot of resources, and a lot of times because of how we were influenced by the Munyawak, right, has taken a negative effect on how our relationships are because of politics or whatever it is, right? So a lot of times we have a hard time reaching out to our own communities, but there is still Wahkoton, meaning our um, relatives, right? You can go to the aunties, say like the fathers that I'm talking about, right? You can extend that help or go to them with just a pack of cigarettes or even one cigarette to ask them, can you refer me or could you help me in whatever? Like, and I think about that because a lot of the fathers have male little girls, little daughters, and it's so important that they connect them with rite of passage, right?
Yeah, okay.
When they become a woman, or what to expect, or the ceremonies that go with that, right? So they can go to aunties or go to any elder. It doesn't have to be in a community. You. I know a lot of elders would welcome that question, or they could refer them to somebody that does those things.
You talk about the protocol involved with approaching an elder because even myself, I was worried coming here today and I was like, "Oh no, was I supposed to grab some tobacco?" Um, but I also have learned that I don't let it stop me
Mhm.
because I think yes, protocol is important and I want to respect that and do what I know, but I don't know. So would you say like, I love that you say the protocol because we need to teach that as well. So what if somebody doesn't know the protocol though?
It's a lot of understanding elders will say, "I don't know what the protocol is," and they'll give you that teaching,
Yeah, right?
to be able to say, "This is how you can do it,"
Oh, I love
and,
that. So don't let
s
it stop you.
don't let it stop
Yeah,
you.
right?
Exactly. And the other thing that I wanna mention, that I think about too is coming from small communities and stuff like that, there's been a lot of, um, death around the communities when it comes to death and stuff, like, it's part of natural law, so a lot of people get resentful to the higher power because why'd they take this family member and
Right.
stuff like that, but that's part of natural law. We all, are born, and then the creator only knows our destiny, right? Whether I'm only here for a year or another 70 years or whatever, right? So only creator knows that, so we try to live the best way of our life. But there's grief, right? There's grief when I say about small communities that we lose people rapidly, including elders, right?
Mhm.
And lately it's been mental health with people with addictions and stuff like that. How do you deal with where was I going with this? Grief, right? Because it's always happening every week, like people around you, right? So we don't have time to grieve
Yeah.
things. And then when I talk about grief, it's also another thing. Losing our identity could be grief, right? Losing a
Absolutely.
dog could be grief, right? Materialistic things like if your house burned down, you lose the family pictures or whatever. So you deal with so much grief, right?
Do you think
And
it's harder for men to deal with grief?
it is because, and this
Yeah.
is where I was going with that, is that the men, women are built differently where we just express ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And men have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
But I have hope for men because they can do that in a sweat lodge, right?
Oh,
If
yeah.
they go to a sweat lodge and stuff, you don't nobody has to see them cry, but we also need to teach them crying is healing,
Yeah.
laughter is healing, sharing stories and sitting down with somebody is all of those things, right? It doesn't necessarily have to break down and say, "Oh, I love this," and
Right.
whatever, right? Because they don't show that emotion that way. They show it by doing right, doing things like, "Well, I'll build you a cabinet," stuff like
Right.
that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that you say that because I think, I think grief is a big part of, the men in my experience, the men in my life. I think grief is a hidden piece of it, even, around like if bad things have happened to them.
Mhm.
I don't need to say it,
Yeah.
there's enough bad things that happen to
Mhm.
people, but, I think that they, You can feel like you've lost a part of yourself,
Yeah.
and how do you gain that back, right?
Part of that is healing, and part of that is knowing what they strive for and, appreciating them or complimenting them and just loving them and just to say "Akamemok," just keep work
Akamemuk?
Akamemok, yeah.
Akamemuk. I
So
like
just
that.
keep working on whatever it is.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. I appreciate your time, Teresa.
Thank you.
I appreciate your wisdom, and I love to learn more from you in the future. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
very
much.
much, yes. Thank you.
Thanks again for tuning in. But before we go, I want to give a quick thank you to TELUS Business for their support. Running a business means you need reliable phone and internet without the headache of juggling multiple providers. That's where TELUS Business comes in. They're determined to be your number one technology partner to help your business thrive, which is why they do the hard work to make things easy, to save you time, money, and headaches. If you're looking to simplify your business operations without compromising on service, check out telus.com/business. That's it for today. We'll be back next Tuesday with a brand new episode. So until then, settle down.